He didn't say goodbye to everyone, only to those who had changed, those who had grown dot as the train pulled away. He wrote one final line in his notebook. When the orchard finally spoke, it did not shout. It whispered. And still, the whole village heard it. Chapter 20. The smell of smoke in summer arrived in Thistledown. Vale like a sigh of relief. The lanes bloomed with hollyhocks and buttercups, and the annual Vale Summer Festival returned to the village green, complete with bunting, honey scones, and the Morris dancers who seemed to age 1 year per performance. Children ran among the stalls. Old grudges thawed. And Lena Marsh, now known quietly, respectfully as Lena Merton, had taken her place behind the apothecary's counter with newfound steadiness. She didn't talk about the orchard unless asked, but when she was asked, she told the truth. Evan Cooper, or rather Evan Merton, now ran the plant nursery with ease. He had taken to building raised beds near the orchard ruins, quietly planting apple seedlings in neat rows, as if hoping the land might give back more gently this time. He didn't need to explain it. People understood, even those who once whispered. Didn't whisper now. Too much had come into the light. And yet, one person didn't attend the festival. Henry York. His house had grown cold, its shutters often drawn. The man who once threw garden parties now rarely left his study. There were rumors of inquiries from London. A solicitor seen arriving late. At night, a whisper that the York fortune wasn't what it used to be. Blank, now back in London, received a letter from Clarissa Penhale that simply read, "York is crumbling, and I don't think he's going to go quietly." He reread the letter twice, then packed a bag. He had a feeling he'd be returning to the Vale one last time. That same night, as the festival's final lanterns were being extinguished and the last of the fiddles quieted, a thin plume of smoke rose from the edge of the orchard. Evan saw it first. He ran toward it, torch in hand, but by the time he reached the northern grove, the flames were already devouring what was left of the old cider shed, the place where Daniel's body had once been hidden. A crude sign had been nailed to one of the nearby trees, burnt at the edges, words scorched into it with a knife: "Dead men stay buried." The next morning, Blank arrived to the smell of ash and unease. No one had seen who lit the fire. No one claimed to have heard the hammering. But in a village like Thistledown Vale, someone always knows something. Blank walked the perimeter of the scorched shed, examined the knife marks, then crouched beside a pile of singed wood where he found something the arsonist had missed: a scrap of ledger paper tucked between the beams, half burned, but the ink still legible. York Estate Payment Register, 1993 disbursement, M.W., £1,500 note. For silence. Blank folded the paper carefully. The initials M.W., he knew them, but he couldn't place them. Not yet. And the moment he did, everything from Iris's death to Daniel's to the fire would click into place, because someone else. He found it not in a drawer or beneath a floorboard, but inside the stone wall of the chimney, behind a loose slab of mortar. A rusted tin box. Inside, 2 small items: a handwritten note, folded into fourths, and a faded scarf, red wool, moth-bitten, but neatly tied with string. Blank opened the note carefully. The ink was smudged, the paper brittle, but he could make out most of the words. Asterisk to the one who finds this. If ever someone does, know that I loved her. I loved her more than the orchard, more than the land, more than I feared her family. We had a daughter. I saw her once. They took her from me before I could hold her. Victoria was not cruel. She was afraid. And fear makes cowards of people who might otherwise do right. Asterisk if she's alive. Tell her I wasn't silent. Tell her I tried. D.M. Blank. Read it twice. Then folded it. Hands slow, reverent. He looked at the scarf again. Small, infant-sized, something. A father might knit, poorly, with calloused fingers and hope. That afternoon, Blank placed the scarf and letter in Lena's hands. She didn't say anything at first, just stared. And then, softly, "He wrote to me." "Yes, and he died not knowing if I'd ever read it." Blank nodded. "But he still wrote it." Lena whispered, "There were tears, but they didn't fall. I used to wonder if I'd been unwanted," she said. "Or worse, inconvenient." She held the scarf against her chest. "No, I know. I was loved, even if it had to be in secret." That night, someone slid a note under Blanc's door. No envelope. Just a torn sheet of cream paper. 5 words. In block capitals. Uneven. Scratched. "You missed one. The sun." Blank stared at it. He reread it. Twice. Then folded it and sat down by the window. Candlelight flickering against the glass. The sun. The timeline had always held a gap. 6 months between Victoria's disappearance and Daniel's vanishing. Long enough for a second secret to take root. But if there was a second child, why had no one spoken of him? Where was he now? And who, exactly, had left that note? Outside, the orchard stirred again, and Benoit Blanc, for the first time in days, felt the unmistakable itch of mystery return. Not past, but present. The orchard had one more secret still. Chapter 18. A stranger known too well. The next. Morning, Benoit Blanc stood before the village's war memorial. Not because he was grieving, but because it was the only place in Thistledown Vale where no one talked. He needed quiet. The message had changed everything. You missed one. The sun. It had arrived after midnight, hand-delivered by someone too careful to be caught. A handwriting told him nothing, deliberately messy, disguised. But the meaning was clear. Victoria and Daniel hadn't had just one child, and the son, whoever he was, had not been given away. He had been hidden, possibly raised right here, under another name. A ghost among neighbors. Blank began by revisiting every child born in late 1992 to mid-1993. He started with school records, quietly requested through the vicar and the old schoolmaster, Mr. Penrose, who was now half blind and more than half nostalgic. "Were only 5 babies that year," the man croaked, flicking through yellowing ledgers. 3 girls, 2 boys. One moved away to Dorset in '99. The other's still here. Blanc's pen stopped. Name? Penrose smiled vaguely. Good lad. Quiet. Works at the garden center now. Grew up on the edge of the Vale. Raised by his uncle after the mother passed. Name's Evan Cooper. The name struck no immediate chord. But the surname Cooper did. There had never been a Cooper family in Thistledown Vale. Not really, just Silas Cooper, a gruff, reclusive man who lived out past the sheep fields in an old caravan. Silas had always refused parish aid, never came to. Fates or funerals. No one knew where he came from. Only that he showed up sometime in the late '90s with a toddler in his arms, and a story no one questioned. Blank closed the ledger gently. Then rose. He found Evan Cooper, where Penrose had said he would be, unloading. Crates of potting soil at the Vale Garden Center, sleeves rolled, headphones dangling from his neck. Early 20s. Dark, dash-haired. Slender, but strong. Eyes like Daniel Merton's. That same depth, that same stillness. Blank introduced himself casually. Asked about the soil, the herbs, the orchard saplings newly in stock. Evan answered politely, clearly, without suspicion. Only when Blank said, You're not from around here originally, are you? Did the young man hesitate? My mum was. He said slowly, Died when I was a baby. Don't remember her. My uncle raised me. Silas. And your father? Evan shook his head. Don't know. Never asked. Was told he ran off. Did Silas ever say who your mother was? No, Evan replied. Just said her name was Mary Cooper. But there's no grave, no photos, nothing. Blank nodded Dot, and when he said goodbye and turned to go, he felt the weight of truth beginning to gather. That evening, Blank visited Silas Cooper's caravan. Dot. It was falling apart at the edges, like the man himself, who answered the door with a cough and a stare that said, I know why you're here. You've looked after him well. Blank said, without preamble. Silas didn't respond. I know who he is. Blank continued. You took him in to keep him. Safe, but it's not your name he carries by right. It's Merton. Daniel's boy. Silas's jaw worked. Then he said hoarsely, Victoria gave birth again. In secret, no records. She panicked. Gave the child to a midwife, Mary, yes, who died not long after. I was Mary's brother. I couldn't let him go to the system. So I came here. Why Thistledown Vale? Because I knew Daniel, Silas whispered. Worked with him. Heard what happened. Thought maybe this place owed the boy something. Blank was quiet. Then, you were the one who wrote the note. Silas didn't deny it. I couldn't let you leave without finding him, he said. Not if you'd found her. Lena, Blank said. His sister. Silas nodded. I kept it from him all his life. Didn't want him to carry the weight. But maybe now he should know. The next day, Lena and Evan met under the apple trees. Blank stood at a distance. Out of earshot, as they talked. First confusion, then understanding, then the slow, stunned shape of recognition. Not memory, not blood, but something deeper. The sense that you had been living parallel to someone without ever knowing. They sat for a long time beneath the blossoms. And when they stood, they walked back through the orchard together. Brother and sister. Roots and branches. At last. Chapter 19. Iris's last letter. The Willoughby house had stood untouched since Iris's death. Dust lay undisturbed across the mantel, and the rose-patterned teacups still sat where she'd left them, as if she might return at any moment. Benoit Blanc stood in her sitting room at dusk. The solicitor had given him the key for closure. But it felt like something else. Like a summons. The room smelled faintly of dried lavender and old ink. On the desk, under a heavy paperweight shaped like a fox, lay a sealed envelope, not addressed to anyone, but it bore one unmistakable marking. To be opened only when the orchard speaks. Blank stared at it. He opened it with care. Inside was a single handwritten letter in Iris's distinct, angular script. To whoever listens and heeds. If you are reading this, it means the orchard has finally told its story. Or perhaps someone clever has learned to ask the right questions. I have always known what happened. I was there when Victoria broke. She came to me with her hands shaking and her dress still muddy. She said Daniel had threatened to reveal the child. Said she couldn't let him ruin everything. But I knew Daniel. He would never have threatened her. He would have begged her to be brave, to love her child out in the open. I believe, and I will, always believe, that it was Henry York who turned her fear into desperation. He had everything to lose. His marriage to Victoria had not yet been made public. His ambitions depended on the illusion of control. And so Daniel Merton vanished. The orchard buried him. Victoria drank herself to silence. And the children, the children, they were scattered like dandelion seeds. I did what I could. I kept Lena nearby. I watched Evan from afar after Silas came, but I never told them. I wanted to spare them the weight, but if you are reading this, then they are ready. Give them this truth. They were not abandoned. They were not accidents. They were loved, and they were fought for, and they are the ones who will decide what becomes of this village now. Iris Willoughby Blanc sat in the quiet for a long time after. He thought of Lena Dot of Evan, of Victoria, a woman torn between love and reputation, and a man like Henry York, pulling every thread in the background. Then he folded the letter and left the house. The next morning, Lena and Evan stood outside York House. Blank stood with them, just behind. The front door opened slowly. Henry York peered. For the first time, his shirt was wrinkled. His tie hung loose. The man looked. Small. Lena stepped forward and held up the letter. Iris's letter. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "Everything." Henry didn't speak, didn't deny, didn't even close the door. He just stood there as they turned and walked away, Evan's hand resting briefly on Lena's shoulder, a quiet gesture of unity. The vicar looked at Blank, and for a moment his old, gentle face was marked by something far sharper. "Pregnancy," he said. "Rumor had it she fell pregnant by Daniel. Her father, Charles Alton, sent her away for 6 months. She returned, thin, silent, because he didn't just believe Victoria had fallen pregnant. He believed the child had lived, and someone in the village might still be carrying the blood of Daniel Merton and Victoria Alton without ever knowing it." Chapter 15. The child in the orchard. By now, the people of Thistledown Vale were used to Benoit Blanc's return. But they watched him differently this time, not with suspicion, but with wariness, as if he could see through them, past their good manners and clean fences, into things they'd promised themselves were gone, because they weren't gone. Not yet. Blank spent the morning revisiting the parish records, the ones too faint to scan, kept in a locked drawer in the church's stone cellar. The pages were dry and foxed, the ink faded to near ghosts, but he found what he needed in the baptism register. Child, female. Date, April 12, 1993. Mother, Victoria A. Father. Guardian, Iris Dubbery. Entry cancelled, June 1993. Reason, adoption. There was no name. Just a dash, as if the baby had never truly existed. Blank stared at that dash for a long time, then closed the book, and went to the person who always seemed closest to the heart of any hidden thing. Lena Marsh was trimming hedge branches outside the post office when he found her. She glanced up at his approach and paused. "You've found something," she said. Blank didn't answer right away. He studied her face, the high cheekbones, the dark eyes, the way she furrowed her brow when she was bracing for pain. He saw it all now. Not just Margaret's features. Daniel Merton's. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the story you've been told all your life about your mother, Margaret, may only be half the truth." Lena set her clippers down. "I'm listening." They sat inside at her kitchen table, a pot of tea growing cold between them. Blank laid the photograph between them, Victoria and Daniel, under the apple tree. "She loved him," he said, "and became pregnant by him." Lena nodded slowly. "That was always the rumor. I thought it might be about me." "It is," Blank said, "but not the way you think." He pulled out the record from the church. She gave birth in April 1993. The child was taken into care, briefly by Iris. Before being adopted, the Altons paid to hush it, to give the child a new name, a new story. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "And Margaret?" "I believe she was told to play the role of aunt, to cover the adoption, perhaps even to agree to raise the child under new pretenses. But Margaret ... and shortly after." He met Lena's eyes. "The more I learn, the more I believe Margaret may not have been your mother, but your midwife, or your guardian, maybe even your protector. But biologically?" He slid the ring across the table. "Your parents were Victoria Alton and Daniel Merton." Lena didn't cry. She sat very still, very quiet. "Then that makes Henry York my Not by blood, Blanc said, but by marriage. He married Victoria not long after Daniel disappeared. That's why she was so afraid when Iris began asking questions. If the story came out, she would lose everything: her marriage, her standing, the myth she'd built around herself. And Iris was going to tell me. Blanc nodded. That's why she died. There was a long silence. Outside, the church bell rang once, just once, at an odd hour, like a clock correcting itself. Lena took the ring in her palm. Her hands were shaking, but her voice wasn't. I want the truth on paper, she said. No. More dashes in records. I want my name, my real name, registered properly, even if I never use it. Blanc gave a quiet smile. You deserve it? Later that night, in his room above the inn, Blanc wrote only one line in his notebook. Lena Merton, daughter of Victoria and Daniel. The village will never say it aloud, but it will never forget again. Outside, the orchard creaked in the wind, and the trees, long silent, seemed to breathe. Chapter 16. Ash and Inket happened just before dawn. The parish archives, the same stone-walled cellar where Benoit Blanc had found the baptism record, caught fire. The blaze was small, contained, quickly, and the church itself was unharmed. But the records? Gone. Every baptismal log, every council file from before 1995, every map, every adoption note, every trace of who came from where and why, reduced to soot and curling paper. Blanc arrived before the firemen had finished packing up. The vicar stood to one side, his cassock dusted with ash, looking as if 100 years had passed through him overnight. I locked it last night, Reverend Hatch said hoarsely. Same as always. No signs of forced entry. Blanc didn't need to say what they were both thinking. This was not an accident. It was erasure. That morning, Blanc returned to Lena's cottage. She answered the door already dressed, already bracing. Herself, as if she'd felt something coming through the village air. He told her. She sat down hard on the edge of the counter. All of it? He nodded. Double quotes, the record of my birth, she said. My parents' names. Not gone entirely, Blanc replied gently. He pulled from his coat a folded sheet of parchment. I took a copy. Lena looked at him. You thought someone might try to destroy it. I thought someone already had. Why else bury Daniel in the orchard? Why else let Iris die for speaking? She took the paper and held it like it might shatter. Her voice was low. Cold now, Henry. Blanc hesitated. Lena pressed. He knew. He always knew. And he married her anyway. Yes, Blanc said. Because it gave him power. And he held on to it by keeping your parentage hidden. Not to protect you, Lena, but to protect himself. Lena stood. Her jaw was tight. Then, I'm done hiding too. She didn't go to the police. She went to the village hall during the Thursday council meeting. Walked in while the room was full, council members seated, minutes being read, biscuits half-eaten. She walked to the front, set down the ring, and read the copy of her birth record aloud. There were no interruptions. No gasps. Only one moment. When Henry York, seated at the end of the table, stood slowly and left the room, wordless, exiled not by vote, but by truth. Outside, Clarissa Penhale stood waiting. She took Lena's hand without a word and led her away from the murmuring crowd. Apothecary was closed that day, but the bell above the door still chimed softly as they stepped inside. Clarissa opened a small drawer behind the counter. Inside was a narrow, cloth-wrapped parcel. I wasn't sure if I should ever give this to you, she said, but Iris wanted you to have it. Lena unwrapped it. Inside, a silver necklace. A locket. She opened it. On one side, a photograph of Victoria Alton as a girl, smiling. On the other, Daniel Merton in a field, holding a lamb, his face sunlit. Lena pressed her. thumb against the silver. "I remember him," she whispered. Not his voice, just the shape of him. "Picking me up in an orchard," Clarissa nodded. "He loved you." Lena closed the locket. "Then I won't let him be forgotten again." That evening, Benoit Blanc took a final walk through the orchard. Trees no longer felt accusing. They felt like witnesses. Quiet ones, as he passed the spot where Daniel had been unearthed. He left a small brass plaque at the base of a gnarled trunk. "Daniel Merton beloved, buried. Remembered at last?" He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. Chapter 17. The letter in the wall. The cottage at the edge of the orchard had stood empty. For years, its thatch had gone thin. Ivy crept over the lintels like a long hand, and the hearth hadn't been lit since the late 90s, when old Mrs. Roper passed in her sleep. The place was meant to be torn down. Yet for some reason, no one ever had. The locals called it Merton's Place. Quietly, without acknowledgement, Blanc arrived, there just after dawn. He didn't know why. Only that he'd woken in the night with a thought he couldn't shake. Daniel Merton had lived somewhere. The truth. Letters continued to arrive for Benoit Blanc at the Stag and Fern. One from Clarissa, a small bottle-marked verger, with a note that read, "Not grief, this time, only beginnings." One from the vicar, "You were right." Iris would have hated a statue. She'd have preferred a bench with no plaque. "We're building one." And one from Lena, "Dear Mr. Blank, the village misses you. You'd be pleased to know that the Sunday market now includes a stall for local writers." The first story read aloud was a mystery. No murder. Just a missing cat and an old lady with 3 names. I've kept mine, but I've added another. Lena Marsh Alton. A hyphen feels honest somehow, Thank you for showing me that truth doesn't have to hurt to matter. Yours. Lena *. The train from Paddington reached the edge of the village only once a week, and somewhere, far away, in a city full of new puzzles. Benoit Blanc smiled faintly when he read Lena's words. The mystery was over, but the healing had only just begun. Chapter 12. A clock that strikes 2 weeks had passed since Victoria York's arrest. The village had begun to stitch itself back together, slow as ivy over old stone. But beneath the surface, things were different. People whispered more softly, glanced behind themselves in shops, looked at one another with just a touch more scrutiny, as if any neighbor might, under the right circumstances, be something other. And they appeared. But in some corners of Thistledown Vale, life pressed stubbornly on. At the old bell tower, a repairman arrived one morning with a ladder, a long pole, and a frown. The clock had begun striking twice at noon, a strange double chime that had unnerved half the village and amused the rest. The vicar blamed dust in the gears. The repairman disagreed. "Someone's been tampering," he muttered. "But, for the life of me, I don't know why." That same afternoon, Clarissa Penhale found an envelope on her shop's back doorstep. No postage, no name. Inside, a single folded sheet of yellowed newsprint. She read the headline once, twice, and felt her blood run cold. "Apothecary heir vanishes. London family silent on disappearance." August 1986. The photograph below showed a young woman in a long coat, glancing over her shoulder as she stepped into a car. She looked eerily like a younger Clarissa, but it wasn't her. She turned the clipping over, scrawled on the back, in shaky ink, "You know who she was." And who paid to keep it quiet. Clarissa sat down on the apothecary stool and didn't move for an hour. Elsewhere, in the long grass of the lower orchard, the village boys found something curious. An old shoe, cracked and mossy, with bones still. Inside it, the constable was called. He grumbled. Probably a fox. Or badgers, but a week later, The coroner's preliminary report confirmed it. Human remains. Adult. Male. Approximately 30 years dead. And just like that, the past opened a second door. Far away, in a London townhouse with tall books and taller shadows, Benoit Blanc received an anonymous telegram that said simply, "They buried him beneath the cider trees. I thought you should know. A friend of the forgotten." He set the slip down slowly. Then, with a long exhale, he rose to fetch his coat dot in thistledown veil. The clocks ticked strangely. The orchard whispered in the wind. And behind all of it, a second story. Older, darker, unfinished, began to stir beneath the scent of spring. Chapter 13. Beneath the cider trees, the train slid back into the thistledown. Vale Station with its usual hiss and clatter. But this time, no one waited on the platform. Benoit Blanc stepped off alone, carrying a smaller case than before, and wearing a hat tilted slightly against the spring wind. The sky was overcast. The blossoms on the apple trees had begun to fall, carpeting the station in pale petals like a funeral had already happened. Blanc walked the familiar path toward the village without haste. He passed Mrs. Havers outside the bakery, who gave him a startled wave, then Arthur March, who watched him over the top of his newspaper, eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. The air in the vale had changed again. This time it carried unease, not grief. He arrived at the constable's office just after midday. Sergeant Lennox was bent over a stack of papers, a mug of tea growing cold at his elbow. He looked up with wide eyes. "You came back." "I heard," said Blanc, "about the bones, the orchard." Lennox gave a slow nod. "They found more yesterday. Bits of cloth. Something metal. Maybe a belt buckle. The coroner's dating it early 90s. Definitely not recent. But someone tried to keep it quiet." "Where exactly?" "Far side of the cider trees. The part no one harvests anymore. Ground's too uneven, apparently. The orchard used to be bigger. That whole area was part of the old Alton estate." Blanc's eyes narrowed. "The Altons again." Lennox nodded grimly. Iris always said that family had roots deeper than anyone remembered. Maybe she meant that literally. That evening, Blanc visited Reverend Hatch, who greeted him with a wearier face than before and a flask tucked discreetly under his arm. "I was hoping you'd come," the vicar said. "The orchard's waking something up. People are remembering things they've tried hard to forget, such as names, arguments, disappearances." He handed Blanc a folded page from the parish record archive. Missing, Daniel Merton. Age, 28. Farm laborer. Employed at Alton Estate. Date last seen, October 5, 1993. No known relatives. No investigation pursued. Blanc frowned. "That's nothing. No inquiry? No follow-up?" The vicar shook his head. "The record's nearly blank. And that's what bothers me most. Daniel Merton worked for the Altons for nearly a decade. And one day he vanished. Quietly, cleanly. No police, no questions. And Victoria York?" Blanc asked. Or rather, Victoria Alton. "She was in the village that year," the vicar said quietly. "Not long before she married Henry York. She used to ride through the orchard on a gray horse. People used to say she and the Merton boy were close." Blanc made one final stop that evening. The edge of the old orchard, where the trees grew wild and crooked, and the air always smelled a little fermented. The dig site had been cordoned off with thin rope and 3 wooden stakes, a lantern, hung from one of them, casting light on a growing cavity in the earth. Blanc crouched beside it. The bones were there, not all, but enough. And beside them, tangled in roots, was a ring. He reached for it gently, brushing away soil with his gloved hand. It was cracked with age, but the inscription inside was legible. VANDM 1992. Victoria Alton, Daniel Merton Blanc sat back on. His heels, the orchard whispering above him. This wasn't murder out of convenience. This was something older, more intimate. Back at the inn, Blanc lit a fire and opened his notebook. 2 names underlined. Victoria Alton, twice at the heart of death. What did she try to bury the first time? Daniel Merton, gone for 30 years. A man no one asked after dot and below them. A fresh question forming. What else did Iris Willoughby know? Chapter 14. The ghost of Daniel Merton reigned through. A night in Thistledown Vale, and by morning the orchard was soaked in silence. Crows had taken to perching in the crooked limbs of the cider trees, staring down at the excavation like mourners at a graveside. Benoit Blanc stood beside them at sunrise, his umbrella tilted low, watching a constable in gumboots haul another fragment of cloth from the mud dot, the metal tag sewn into the fabric read, D. Merton, Alton Estate Workwear, 1991. There could be no doubt now. The body belonged to Daniel Merton, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure he was forgotten. Back at the village archives, Blanc sat with Clarissa Penhale, whose expression had grown noticeably more drawn since the anonymous newspaper clipping arrived at her doorstep. He laid the ring on the table between them. Did you know him? He asked gently. Clarissa nodded after a long pause. Everyone did. Daniel was that kind of man. Honest, gentle, never pushed himself forward. Just belonged somehow. Victoria Alton and Daniel Merton, Blanc said, tapping the initials. In the band? Were they lovers? Clarissa hesitated. Not publicly, but there were stories. Iris used to mutter about it sometimes, said Victoria had a dangerous softness for the wrong sort of men. Blanc raised an eyebrow. And Daniel was the wrong sort? Clarissa gave a bitter smile. He was poor, illegitimate. He worked the land with his hands. That made him invisible in the drawing rooms, but not to Victoria. No, Clarissa said, not to her. Blanc took a walk later that morning, not along the village lanes, but out past the abandoned east wing of the Alton estate, now overgrown and sagging into itself. Half its windows were boarded. The stone had gone green with moss. It was a house that had once had pride and had long since lost it. Inside the old stable block, Blanc found what he'd suspected, an old tack trunk, initials carved into the side. V. Inside, beneath a rusting riding crop and moth-eaten scarf, lay a faded photograph in a silver frame. It showed Victoria, seated on a bench under a blooming apple tree. And Daniel Merton, sitting beside her. Not touching, but close. Too close for it to be mistaken. That afternoon, Blanc returned to the Vicarage. Reverend Hatch answered the door with bloodshot eyes, and the smell of tobacco clinging to his sleeves. Blanc held up the photo. The vicar went still. Where did you get that? Alton Estate, old stable block. Reverend Hatch closed his eyes. So it's all coming back now. Iris knew, didn't she? Blanc asked. The vicar nodded. She always had her finger on the pulse of things we tried to ignore. She once told me Victoria had been in love with Daniel, truly. But the pubs were empty, curtains drawn, fireplaces cold. But beneath the hush was a shift. A tiny exhale, like the first breath after a long-held secret. And in his room above the inn, Benoit Blanc packed away the final piece of Iris Willoughby's lockbox, the faded recipe. Now folded neatly between. Blanc studied her for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and held out a sealed envelope. Iris left this, for you. It was tucked into the back of the lockbox. No label, no instructions, just your name. Lena took it with trembling fingers. She didn't open it then. She simply stared at it, as if afraid the truth might evaporate when the flap was broken. That afternoon, the village council met in private. No minutes were taken. There was no vote, just a shared silence, heavy and awkward. The name Iris Willoughby was mentioned 17 times. The name Victoria York only twice. Henry York did not attend by evening. His house had gone dark at the Stag and Fern. Blanc took his supper by the hearth, alone. He did not bring out his notebook. He did not speak to the innkeeper. He sat and stared into the flames as the past week unspooled behind his eyes like film. Iris collapsing with the scent of grief, still clinging to her coat. Clarissa's trembling hands over her missing page. The vicar's reluctance. His unread letter. Lena, cradling the weight of a name she never chose. And Victoria York, gloves on, eyes sharp, trying to stop the past from speaking. He had solved the crime, but justice, Blanc knew, was never the same as peace. At dusk, there was a knock on his door. Lena. She stood with the envelope open in her hand and read about the eyes. She wrote it 2 weeks ago. She said, "Before the festival. It's not a confession. It's something else." Blanc said nothing, only gestured for her to sit. Lena began to read. "My dear Lena, by now you will know at least some of the truth. You will feel it like a bruise, pressing. From inside, I never meant to harm you. I only wanted to preserve the good things, your gentleness, your steadiness. You were always the best of this village, and you never even knew it. I saw the way Victoria watched you. I knew there was something more than guardianship in it. Margaret was like a ghost in those days. I believe she left you not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Victoria filled the gap. Whether she did it for love or vanity, I'll never know. But what matters is this. You are not made of scandal. You are not the product of shame. You are yours. Entirely. Beautifully. Do not let the truth destroy you. Let it shape you. Love." Iris. Lena folded the letter. Her hands were steady now. She didn't want revenge, she said. She wanted freedom. "For you," Blanc replied. Lena looked at him, eyes clearer than they'd been all week. "I think I'll keep the name," she said. "Lena Marsh. It may not be real in ink, but it's mine." Blanc gave a quiet smile. "In the end, that's all identity is. The name we choose to live under, not the one someone else gives us." That night, the scent of roses drifted over the vale. Clarissa Pennell reopened her apothecary, the little bell above the door ringing soft into the dark. The vicar lit a candle in Iris Willoughby's memory. And in the solicitor's house, Victoria York sat in silence, gloved hands resting in her lap as the full weight of her silence bore down at last. Injustice may hide in silence, but so too may guilt. And guilt has a longer scent trail than perfume. Chapter 10. The final thread. Benoit Blanc rose early the next morning, long before the village stirred. His suitcase sat by the door, neatly packed. The fire in the grate was cold. His cup of tea, untouched. He'd planned to leave quietly. No farewells. No speeches. Just the path back to the train and the slow forgetting of Thistledown Vale as the countryside blurred behind him. But the Vale, as ever, had one more whisper left to give. He found Reverend Godfrey Hatch waiting outside the inn. The vicar looked pale, his collar slightly askew, holding a brown envelope against his chest like a confession he'd rehearsed for too long. "I couldn't keep it," he said without preamble. "Not anymore." Blanc held out a hand. The envelope trembled as it passed between them. "I didn't know what was inside until last night," the vicar added, quietly. "Iris gave it to me months ago. Told me to burn it after her death. But only if her death was natural. Once I heard Victoria had been arrested." Blanc opened the envelope. Inside, a photograph and a single page of handwritten notes. The photo was old, mid-1980s, From the looks of it, 2 young women, one blonde, smiling wide, the other darker, with eyes like flint. They were standing outside what appeared to be a train station. On the back, someone had written, "Margaret and Iris, St. Austo." July 86 Blank looked up. Iris knew Margaret personally. The vicar nodded. They were close once, before Margaret left. Blank turned to the note. It was written in Iris's hand, but less composed than usual, less polished. Raw, almost. "Lead to Lena." I said I suspected. But the truth is, I knew. Margaret told me everything before she vanished. About the child, about the adoption, about Victoria's threats. She feared for herself, but more for the girl. I promised never to speak it, but a promise made in fear is not a promise that should be kept. The girl has a right to know Lena is not only Margaret's daughter. She is the daughter of the man who now pretends he never met Margaret. Henry York. Blank folded the note, let out a slow breath. "I suspected as much," he said, half to himself. The resemblance, subtle, perhaps, but there in the angles of the eyes, the sharp brow, the inward quiet that masked the calculating mind. Henry York had not merely covered for his wife. He had been protecting himself. A scandal born of his past, a secret born of shame, and a motive just beneath the surface. Later, that morning, Blank stood by the station as the train approached. Mist curled around the rails like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. He did not leave the envelope with the police. He did not confront Henry York. He left the decision, instead, with Reverend Hatch, who promised to give the letter to Lena when she was ready. Blank believed he would, because some truths, when spoken too soon, can wound worse than lies, and some must wait for the right moment, the one that changes everything without shattering it. As the train pulled away, Thistledown Vale shrank behind him, its secrets cracked open, its peace uneasy but honest again. He did not know what Lena would do. He did not know if Victoria would be tried, or quietly shuffled away behind wealth and connections. But he knew. This, Iris Willoughby had not died in vain. The truth had come for her in the form of perfume. And in the end, it lingered, not in violence, but in clarity. As the fields rushed past the window, Benoit Blanc closed his eyes, and for the first time, since arriving, allowed himself to exhale. Chapter 11. The shape of after, with Benoit Blanc gone. Thistledown Vale did what it always did. It carried on. The sun rose over dew-bright hedgerows. The bells at St. Cuthbert's tolled at 10:30. The sheep wandered the far paddocks with mild disinterest in human affairs. But inside the walls and hearts of the villagers, things were not quite as they had been. Clarissa Penhill reopened the apothecary on Monday. The brass bell above the door had been polished until it gleamed, and her hands, once shaky with suspicion and grief, now moved with renewed purpose. There was no queue that morning, only Mrs. Havers from the bakery, who came in for a jar of elderflower balm, and after a pause, a quiet apology. I said things. The old woman murmured that I shouldn't have. Clarissa nodded. I did too, just not out loud. At the post office, Lena Marsh had begun to speak less and listen more, not to gossip, but to her own thoughts. The envelope from Iris remained tucked inside her coat pocket, unopened since her second reading. Sometimes she touched it idly. Sometimes she forgot it was there, but it had changed something in her. She looked in the mirror now with different eyes. The woman she saw wasn't an orphan, or an accident. She wasn't a secret. She was an answer, not to someone else's question, but her own. The vicar, Reverend Hatch, made a quiet announcement during morning prayer the following Sunday. We will be dedicating the rose garden in memory of Iris Willoughby, he said, not because she was always kind, but because she was always watching. And sometimes that's the sort of guardian a village needs most. No one disagreed, no one clapped, either. But there was a silence afterward that meant something. Meanwhile, at York House, silence reigned. Victoria had been taken to a private facility under psychiatric evaluation. There would be no trial, not yet. Henry York's reputation had folded inwards like damp paper, not torn, but deeply, visibly damaged. He no longer greeted anyone on the green. He no longer stood at his gate with his habitual nod. The solicitor who once held half the Vale's secrets had become a figure of avoidance, his door knocked on only by couriers. And Lena? She did not confront him, not yet, but once, passing by, she stopped and looked up at the house. He stood in the window. They looked at one another for a long moment. Then Lena turned away, not in. Chapter 7. Memory on the wondering had returned to Thistledown Vale, soft and steady, falling like whispered prayers upon the cobbled streets and slate rooftops. It washed the village clean, or tried to. But some things, Benoit Blanc knew, could not be washed away. He walked slowly back to Lena Marsh's cottage, the letter from Iris Willoughby still fresh in his mind. They have changed their name once before. They will do so again. He did not believe that referred to Lena. No. Lena was a thread, not the hand pulling it. She was a keyhole, and someone else had hidden. Behind the locked door all these years, Lena was waiting for him. She stood just inside the gate, umbrella, folded, face pale but determined. In her hand was a small silver locket, old and worn smooth with age. "I thought I'd lost this years ago," she said as he approached. "Found it today, tucked in the back of a drawer in my aunt's writing desk. You asked about perfume. I think this might be part of it." Blanc took it gently. The clasp stuck for a moment, then sprang open with a soft click. Inside were two things: a pressed sprig of lavender and a torn scrap of faded paper, a perfume recipe, written in a looping, old-fashioned hand. Base, lavender. Heart, blackcurrant. Top, sweet almond plus 1 drop belladonna. Blanc's breath caught. "Does this handwriting look familiar to you?" he asked. Lena nodded slowly. "It's my aunt's, or at least the woman I thought was my aunt. Clarissa says it matches something she found in her old supplier invoices. I showed her this morning." He looked at her. "And what else did she say?" "She asked me if I ever smelled that perfume. I told her I had. Once, years ago. At a funeral. I think, for the old schoolmaster. There was a woman there. Blonde, elegant, wore gloves even in summer. No one seemed to know who she was, but I remember the smell. It made my head spin." Blanc's eyes narrowed. "A woman in gloves. Unknown, sweet almond and lavender and belladonna." He turned, his coat catching the wind. "Thank you, Miss Marsh. You've just told me who killed Iris Willoughby." Blanc did not go to the apothecary. He did not go to the vicarage, or the solicitor's office, or the constable's desk. He went instead to the village green, where stalls still stood half disassembled from the festival days before. Rain pooled in their folds. Petals clung to the grass like bruised confetti. He waited beneath the gazebo until he heard the soft footfalls he was expecting. Clarissa Pennell stepped into view, wrapped in a long black raincoat, hair pinned high, face unreadable. "Wondered when you'd come for me," she said. "I haven't come to accuse you," Blanc replied, "but I have come to ask you something." She stood still, motionless as a statue. "Who was the woman who taught you to make perfume?" Clarissa blinked once, then said, very softly, she called herself Margaret. I never knew her surname. She lived in Wales, ran a little perfumery off the coast road. I apprenticed there when I was 17. Did she ever speak of a daughter? A niece, perhaps? Clarissa didn't speak, but her eyes did. Lena, Blanc said. She wasn't her niece. She was her daughter. And someone wanted that truth erased. Iris found the connection, Clarissa whispered, years ago. I think she kept it secret until now because she wanted proof. She'd been searching. She found it, Blanc said. In your formulation book, the missing page. The scent of Summer's End wasn't yours alone. It was based on the recipe in that locket, and she realized what it meant. Yes, Blanc said, and someone else realized it too. Someone who had worn that perfume once. Someone who had changed. Names before. Someone who had something to lose if the truth came out. That night, Blanc sat with Sergeant Lennox in the candlelit office. Reviewing the names in the village record. It didn't take long. A single marriage certificate from 1989. Margaret Penhale, age unknown, married briefly to a man from Yorkshire. She vanished from the records in 1992. No death certificate. No forwarding address. A ghost, and beneath it, a cross-reference from Iris Willoughby's personal notes. Margaret Penhale equals Margaret Alton, sister of Victoria Alton, now known as Victoria York, Henry York's wife. Rarely seen. Always traveling. Rumored to be delicate. Not delicate. Blanc thought. Missing. Hidden. A woman who'd taken her sister's child, changed her own name, and buried the past beneath. Expensive perfumes and silk gloves. He turned to Lennox. She's here, Blanc said. She never left, and if I'm right, she was at the festival. Lennox frowned. But I didn't. She wore a hat, gloves, likely passed herself off as one of the judge's aides. All she needed was a moment with the perfume bottle. One drop. Belladonna disperses quickly. Iris collapsed within minutes. The sergeant stared at him. But why kill Iris? Because she wouldn't be silent anymore. Blanc stood. It's time we paid a visit to the solicitor's house. Chapter 8. A visit to York House. The home of Henry and Victoria York sat at the northern edge of Thistledown Vale, flanked by 2 hawthorn trees and an iron gate that had not been properly oiled in years. It was a proud, silent house. Red brick, gabled, with leaded windows that seemed to watch the world with suspicion, rather than welcome. Benoit Blanc stood at the gate with Sergeant Lennox beside him. The rain had stopped, but mist hung low over the fields, thick as breath on cold glass. Are you certain? Lennox whispered. No, Blanc said calmly. But certainty, Sergeant, is a luxury that often arrives too late. We knock. They did. It was Henry York who answered, as expected, dressed impeccably, his hair combed, a book in one hand. Detective, he said coolly. Sergeant, this is becoming something of a routine, isn't it? Blanc tipped his hat, expression unreadable. Mr. York, we'd like a word with your wife. Henry blinked, not surprised, exactly, but certainly wary. Victoria isn't well. She suffers from migraines. She's resting. Blanc's voice was quiet. She attended the festival, Mr. York. The solicitor's eyes narrowed just slightly. You must be mistaken. She wore a dark hat and gloves. Sat behind the judge's table. Left before the crowd gathered. Silence. Then. Very softly. Come in. The sitting room of York House was as orderly as its owner. Leather-bound volumes. Ticking grandfather clock, not a cushion out of place. Henry motioned for them to wait, then disappeared down the corridor. For 2 long minutes, all they heard was the distant murmur of voices. And then, footsteps. Victoria York entered the room like smoke, slowly, carefully, as though her presence might still go unnoticed if she moved gently enough. She was tall, with fine features and pale skin. Her eyes, when they met Blanc's, were sharp. No illness in them. Only calculation. She wore gray. Her hands, as always, were gloved. Mrs. York, Blanc said softly. Thank you for joining us. I didn't realize I had a choice, she replied. Her voice was smooth, flat, not unfriendly, but the kind that could freeze a room without raising in pitch. I'll ask you plainly. Blanc continued. Were you present at the festival? Eh. Pause. Then, yes. Henry flinched beside her. Blanc did not. You posed as a judge's assistant, he said. You watched from the rear, wearing gloves. You left before anyone recognized you. I'm not proud of it, she said, but yes. Why? Asked Sergeant Lennox. Victoria York's gaze moved to the sergeant. For a moment, she said. Nothing. Then, because Iris Willoughby was about to destroy my life. Blanc didn't interrupt. He waited. I was born Victoria Alton, she said slowly. My sister, Margaret, was always the unpredictable one. Brilliant, selfish, fragile. She had a child out of wedlock. She disappeared for a while, then came back. Damaged. She left the baby behind. In your care, Blanc said gently. In my care, she echoed. We never spoke of it again. She left the country, or died. I honestly don't know. Lena grew up thinking I was her aunt. It was better that way. But Iris discovered the truth. She cornered me 2 weeks ago, Victoria said. At the post office, of all places. Said she'd been looking into village birth records. She'd found a gap. Lena's registration didn't match. There were whispers of forged signatures. She asked me outright if Margaret had died. And you lied, Blanc said. Of course I lied. What else could I do? Her voice rose slightly now. Not shrill, but tinged with something close to fear or rage. She said she intended to bring it up at the next council meeting, publicly, that the village had a right to know about long-buried lies, that Lena deserved to know her real bloodline. But it wasn't about Lena. It was about control. So you came to the festival. Yes, she said, to speak with her, to beg her to stop. Blanc looked at her hands. Still gloved. You brought a vial, he said quietly. The old perfume Margaret used to wear, the scent that could rattle a memory. Sweet almond and belladonna. She didn't answer. You added 1 drop to Clarissa's bottle while no one was looking. He sighed, then waited. Watched Iris lean in, breathe it deep, and collapse. Victoria's eyes glistened. I didn't know it would kill her. Just that it would shake her. Maybe make her dizzy, faint. Give her a scare. I didn't want her dead, Mr. Blanc. No, he said gently. But poison doesn't care about intention. A long silence followed. Henry York sat frozen, expression. Blanc, the man who'd spent years sculpting words into weapons, now seemed utterly defanged. Sergeant Lennox rose. Mrs. York, I'll need you to come with me. Victoria stood. No tears. No pleas, only a quiet sigh, as if she'd known this moment would come from the start. Outside, Blanc walked slowly through the heart of the village, the solicitor's cold civility still fresh in his mind. A man so in control that even rage wore a tie. At the bakery, 2 women fell silent as he passed. At the church, the vicar glanced out through the window, then looked quickly away. It was Clarissa Penhill who found him. A little after noon. You are right, she said without greeting. There's a page missing from my formulation book. They stood on the edge of the apothecary garden. She held a small leather-bound journal in her hands. Inside, neatly penned rows of ingredients, dosages, combinations, all organized meticulously. All here, she said, flipping through, except the final notes on Summer's End. I remember where I wrote them. They're gone. Blanc nodded. Who had access? Only me. And Iris. She once asked to read through it, said she was curious about the herbal traditions I was drawing from. And would she have taken it? I don't know, Clarissa whispered. But she knew the scent I was chasing. She said something to me once, strange at the time. She said, "Sometimes grief is the last honest thing we smell." Blank looked at the open book again, then toward the village green. Someone didn't just fear Iris, he said. They feared what she was about to reveal. That night, back at the inn, Blank lit a fire and spread out the contents of Iris's lockbox on the floor. Notes, letters, confessions, gossip wrapped in legalese. There were connections, broken friendships, old betrayals, and one curious document, unsigned, incomplete, that hinted at a forged birth certificate. Blank underlined it in pencil. Then he drew a line to a name that had, until now, seemed irrelevant. Lena Marsh, the cheerful postmistress, known for her lemon shortbread and her ear for everything whispered across the veil. Birth certificate. A will changed. A perfume that smelled of grief. And somewhere behind it all, the lingering scent of motive. Chapter 6. Postmarks and parentage. The morning after his visit with Henry York, Benoit Blanc took his tea beneath the ivy-draped veranda of the Stag and Fern Inn. He sat with his notebook, a soft breeze, teasing the edges of Iris Willoughby's old papers, now sorted into neat stacks across the table. Names, secrets, loose ends, and a single thread that tugged at him more than the others. Lena Marsh. The village postmistress, a woman no one spoke ill of, who remembered everyone's birthday, who smiled so sweetly that even the solicitor softened his voice when addressing her, who, according to a nearly forgotten draft hidden in Iris's box, had never officially existed. Lena Marsh lived in a tidy cottage just off Lavender Lane, tucked beside a row of apple trees that bloomed too early every year. When Blank arrived at her gate that morning, she was already outside hanging linens. "Goodness," she said with a smile, wiping her hands on her apron. "Detective Blank, isn't it? I'd heard you were poking about. I hope I haven't caused alarm." "Oh, no," she said, leading him toward a small bench. "We're a nosy little place, Mr. Blank. If anyone's surprised, it's only that it took this long for a mystery to find us." He smiled, but gently. "You knew Iris Willoughby well?" "I suppose everyone did," Lena replied, pouring tea from a worn thermos. "Though I think she knew me better than I was ever comfortable with." "In what way?" There was a pause, a narrowing of her eyes, as if weighing how much truth to share. "She knew people's business," Lena said at last. "She once said to me, 'Lena, a village is a choir, and I know when someone's singing off key.' I never quite knew what she meant. But lately, I wonder." Blank sipped his tea. "Did she ever speak to you about your family?" A long silence. Lena didn't answer at first. Her smile faltered, just slightly. Then she said, "I was raised by an aunt. That much is common knowledge. My mother died young. My father, well, I was told he was a traveler, passed through and vanished." "May I ask," Blank said softly, "if you've ever seen your birth certificate?" She gave a light laugh, but it was hollow. "Not since I was a girl. Why?" Blank reached into his leather satchel and unfolded a brittle page from Iris's lockbox. It was yellowed, creased, and unfinished. No seal, no signatures, only a name, Lena Margaret Marsh, and 2 empty boxes, mother and father. Lena stared. Then, very quietly, she knew. Blank folded the paper again. She suspected at least. But I believe she was preparing to confront someone with it. Perhaps the truth is buried farther back. Perhaps the name on your birth certificate, had it ever been completed, would have caused someone considerable trouble. "But why now?" Lena whispered. "Why bring it up after all these years?" Blank looked toward the far hedgerows, swaying gently in the breeze, because Iris was preparing to make something public, to name names. "I believe this village, its order, its peace, was preserved for years by unspoken truths. She decided in her final days that the time for silence had passed, and someone stopped her. "Yes," said Blank, "they did." Later that day, back in his room at the inn, Blank unfolded a map of the village, a tourist's brochure with hand-drawn cottages and labeled lanes. He marked the key players with pins: Clarissa Penhale, apothecary; possible motive, resentment; fear of exposure, Henry York; solicitor, motive, revenge; inheritance, Reverend Hatch; confidant, ally, but withholding something, Lena; Marsh, postmistress; unwitting figure in a hidden scandal, Sergeant Lennox, constable; gatekeeper of the envelope. Then he paused. The envelope. He'd nearly forgotten. According to Iris's new will, a sealed message had been left for the constable, only to be opened in the event of unnatural death. And now, with whispers of atropine poisoning swirling and the toxicology report still pending, it was time that envelope was found. Blank found Sergeant Lennox in his cramped office behind the general store, sorting forms with the intensity of a man trying to tame a paper storm. "Detective," Lennox said, clearly weary, "I've just come from the coroner. Preliminary results aren't back, but they're leaning away from natural causes." "I'm not surprised," Blank replied, calmly, "but that makes this all the more urgent." He explained the clause in the will. The envelope meant for Lennox's hands alone, to the sergeant's credit. He didn't scoff or bristle. Instead, he rummaged through a cabinet until he pulled out a thin manila folder, sealed in wax, labeled, in Iris Willoughby's unmistakable pen, to be opened by Sergeant Lennox only in the event of foul play. He cracked it open slowly and read the note inside. Blank watched his eyes move, first steadily, then rapidly. Then, abruptly, they stopped. "What does it say?" Blank asked gently. Lennox didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed the page. Across the desk. Blank read, "If you are reading this, then someone in Thistledown Vale has committed murder. You will find the key in the greenhouse. I have left records. But know this, the one who did it wears a smile, a memory, and something stolen. They have changed their name once before. They will do so again. Ask the postmistress what she remembers of her aunt's perfume." Blank folded the paper carefully. "Name changed," he murmured. "Something stolen. A scent remembered." Lennox looked up. "What does it mean?" "It means," Blank said, rising slowly, "that the killer has walked among us longer than anyone knew, and that the truth is I've been afraid to read it," the vicar admitted, placing it in Blanc's hands. "She asked me to wait. Said it would only make sense if something happened." Blank studied the envelope. No wax seal, no dramatic markings. Just her. Signature flourish in ink. To Godfrey, if needed. He opened it carefully. The letter inside was short. "Godfrey, if you're reading this, then I've been silenced. Not by age or accident, but by design. You know the things I've seen, the things I've held. Secrets rot if left buried too long. I have written it all down. If anything happens to me, it will be because of what I know. Asterisk, tell the detective. He'll understand. Look in the greenhouse." Asterisk, Iblong read it twice. Then he handed it back silently. The vicar was pale. "The greenhouse? She hasn't used that in years. Ever since the ... incident." "What incident?" The vicar hesitated. "It was the year after Clarissa moved here. There was an argument. Iris claimed Clarissa was making tinctures illegally, without proper licenses. Threatened to shut her down. Then one of the parish council meetings turned nasty. Iris collapsed. People said it was stress. But you believe it was something more. I think Iris always suspected she'd been given something. Something to shake her." Blank leaned back. "Have you told the police about this letter?" "No. Why?" The vicar's voice was quiet, because I don't trust him to believe it. Blank gave a small nod. I will go to the greenhouse, he said. But I must ask you something more delicate. Yes? Who, in your opinion, hated Iris enough to kill her? The vicar's answer came quicker than expected. Henry York. Blank blinked. The solicitor? Yes, the vicar said. People think Henry's a dry, dull man, but Iris ruined him. She exposed something years ago. A forged document, I believe. It cost him a lot of standing. He never forgave her. And lately they've been at odds. Over what? The will, said Hatch. She changed it, just last week. I don't know the contents, only that she made it clear several people were about to be disappointed. An hour later, the rain had cleared, and Benoit Blanc found himself at the edge of Iris Willoughby's overgrown greenhouse. It lay behind Thistle Cottage, tucked into a corner where vines had long since claimed the glass roof. Roses and brambles pressed against the panes like children outside a sweet shop. Inside, the air was damp and sharp with loam and rust. Shelves lined the walls, many empty, some stacked with pots and garden tools. But in the far corner, obscured, beneath a faded gardening cloth, Blank found a wooden lock box. It opened easily. Inside was a bundle of papers, brittle and yellowing with age. Some were typewritten, others in Iris's looping script. Names, dates, affairs, land, deeds, bribes, illnesses. Secrets, just hers, everyone's. Back at the inn, Blank sat before the fire, the lockbox beside him, Clarissa's name circled in red ink on one page, Henry. York's on another. The detective stared into the flames as if they might whisper truth. Iris Willoughby had not been murdered for who she was. She had been murdered for what she knew, and the scent of truth, like summer's end, was beginning to rise. Chapter 5. The solicitor's smile the next morning. The sun rose with a kind of cautious politeness, as though unsure if it was welcome. In the village green, children played listlessly, watched over by too many adults, pretending not to be afraid. The once charming gossip had curdled into something sharper, whispered behind fingers, written between lines of small talk. And in the tall brick building just beside the post office, nestled between a bookshop and a shuttered haberdashery, sat the office of Henry York, solicitor at law. Blank arrived precisely at 10, as the church bell struck once, echoing across the still air. He knocked twice on the painted green door. Come, came a voice from within, dry, flat, and clipped like shears through hedge. Henry York was a thin man with neatly parted gray hair, wire-rimmed spectacles, and a smile that seemed more muscle memory than emotion. His desk was clean. A single fountain pen lay parallel to a blotter. The shelves behind him were filled with identical volumes of case law, their spines unreadably uniform. Mr. Blank, he said, rising. To what do I owe the pleasure? Blank gave a slight bow. To curiosity, sir, and to something Iris Willoughby may have left behind. York's smile didn't falter, but his fingers twitched. I was fond of Iris, he said. Though I dare say she was not fond of me. We had our differences. Yes, said Blank gently. I've heard she had cause to alter her will recently. The smile twitched into something colder. You're well informed. Iris trusted very few, but she confided in some, and she wrote things down. York leaned back. Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Blank? Not at all. I am merely observing that you and Iris had history, and that she changed her will days before her death. A death which now, I understand, is no longer considered natural. For a moment, silence. Then York stood, walked to the window, and drew back the curtain. The green outside bustled with harmless motion. The postman, the florist, a dog trotting behind its owner, yet the air still held something taut beneath the surface. Iris was many things, he said finally. Shrewd, egotistical, devoted to this village in the most infuriating way. But she also had a knack for ... cruelty. Subtle, of course. Nothing ever said plainly. But she knew how to wound. And did she wound you? York turned. Yes. There it was. Not shouted, not dramatic. Just a simple truth. Years ago, he continued, I misfiled a property deed. An error. I maintain it was an oversight. But she uncovered it. Used it to humiliate me in front of the parish council. I lost my seat, my clients, my reputation. You stayed in Thistledown Vale, Blanc said. I had nowhere else to go. And now she is gone. Another pause. Then York said, Would you like to see the revised will? Blanc blinked. You still have it? I drafted it. The signed copy is held in a vault at the bank, but I retain a working draft in my files. It will be made public soon enough. He walked to the cabinet, withdrew a folder, and handed Blanc a 3-page document. It was crisp, clean, newly typed. Blanc's? I scanned the pages. The new will revoke several old bequests. Mrs. Willoughby's garden, once promised to the village trust, was now left to a Clarissa Penhale. Her late husband's vintage coin collection, previously designated for a distant cousin, was instead willed to the church. And most curious of all, a sealed envelope was to be given to Sergeant Lennox, the village constable, to open only in the event of her unnatural death. Blanc looked up. She left you nothing, he said quietly. York smiled without warmth. Something darker. Bittersweet. It reminded him of foxglove. His eyes narrowed. He capped it again, slipped it into a handkerchief, and placed it delicately in his pocket. Outside, the village church bell rang once, a low, mournful toll. It was the sound of a place beginning to mourn, but also the sound of something awakening beneath the surface. Curiosity, doubt, suspicion. Back on the green, people were already whispering. I heard it was her heart. No, the look on her face. Marjorie said it was poison. Clarissa's perfume, wasn't it? She always was a strange one. By evening, the rain began to fall. And Benoit Blanc, seated beneath the arch of the ivy-covered inn, watched the villagers pass by with quiet, knowing eyes. He did not rush. Truth, he knew, was like perfume. Real kind never shouted. It lingered. Chapter 3. Whispers and watchful eyes. By Monday, the Vale was in full whisper. No newspaper had printed anything official. No cause of death was confirmed, and yet everyone had a theory. Not that such things were spoken openly, of course. Not in public. Not in daylight. But behind drawn lace curtains. Over warm scones and cooling cups of tea, the words murder, poison, and perfume were passed like heirlooms. Carefully, reverently. Mrs. Edith at Thistle Cottage had said little since the funeral arrangements began. Clarissa Penhale had not been seen since the festival. And most curious of all, Benoit Blanc, the out-of-place, immaculately dressed stranger, had taken up residence at the Stag and Fern Inn, where he spent long hours by the fire reading, writing, and watching. The villagers called him that American detective, though none could say exactly who had told them he was a detective. It had simply become fact. A soft fact, like so many things in Thistledown Vale, but not everyone was content to whisper. That afternoon, the door to the apothecary opened for the first time since the festival. Clarissa Penhale stood in the doorway, slender, sharp-faced, with short auburn hair and skin like porcelain. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a moss-green jumper and a black skirt. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't acknowledge the stares of the passers-by. She swept the sign on the shop's door from close to open then vanished inside. A minute later, the bell above her door rang again. "Miss Pennell," said Benoit Blanc as he stepped in. "What a pleasure to find. You returned." She didn't look up from the shelves she was rearranging. "I suppose you're here to ask questions." "If you'll permit me," he said, removing his hat. "I'm not with the police, as you know. I'm merely curious." "That makes two of us," she said. "Or rather, an entire village." Blank smiled faintly. "I'm not interested in gossip, Miss Pennell. Only in truth. Truth has a particular scent, don't you find?" Now she looked at him. Her eyes, a pale hazel green, held an edge that was both tired and defiant. "You're referring to the perfume?" He nodded. "Summer's End. It was unusual, complex, and to be candid, not altogether pleasant to some. It provoked emotion. It was meant to," she said simply. "Perfume is memory, grief, longing. Anyone can make something sweet. I try to make something real." Blanc's eyes twinkled. "Real indeed." Mrs. Willoughby seemed quite struck by it. A flicker, barely visible, passed over Clarissa's face. "She didn't like me," Clarissa said, turning away. "She smiled and said the right things, but Iris didn't trust outsiders. And I, Mr. Blank, am an outsider in every way. That counts. Did she say anything to you during the judging?" She leaned in, smelled the bottle, then said, "This is dangerous." And then she laughed. A strange laugh. Not amused, more like surprised. "Dangerous," Blank repeated softly. He walked slowly to the shelf where her oils were kept. Dozens of bottles, lavender, bergamot, orris, sandalwood, all carefully labeled. In Clarissa's fine, looping script. Then he noticed one missing. "A shelf with 12 slots," he said, tracing the edge. "But only 11 filled." Clarissa didn't answer at first. Finally, she said, "I misplaced one. Nightshade tincture. It was never meant for the perfume. Just something I was studying. Medicinal history, you see." "And when did it go?" "Missing." She hesitated. "I noticed it gone the morning of the festival. I assumed I'd misfiled it, but now, I don't know." Blanc's voice was calm, measured. "You understand, of course, that even a trace amount of atropine, extracted from belladonna, could mimic symptoms of a heart episode. Shortness of breath, disorientation, blue lips." She folded her arms tightly. "I didn't poison her, Mr. Blank." "I did not say you did. You want to know who had reason to? Ask Reverend Hatch. Ask the vicar what she said to him. Ask Henry York, the solicitor. She knew everyone's secrets." Blank gave her a long, thoughtful look. "I believe you," he said finally. "But belief and proof are not the same." Then he gave a polite bow, tipped his hat, and turned to leave. Just before the bell jingled again, Clarissa's voice followed him. "She called me dangerous, but Iris Willoughby was the most dangerous woman in Thistledown Vale. She just smiled more." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, insistent, like fingers tapping on the shoulder of the village. Benoit Blanc pulled out a small leather notebook as he walked. He scribbled 3 names in it: Clarissa Pennell, the outsider reverend; Hatch, the confidant Henry York, the gatekeeper of wills and words. Then he turned the corner toward the church. Because Clarissa was right. It was time to ask the vicar. What Iris had confessed. Chapter 4. The vicar's unease. The church at Thistledown Vale stood slightly apart from the village, nestled on a gentle rise, surrounded by yew trees and leaning gravestones. It was an old building, modest and crumbling in places, with stained glass windows that filtered even the grayest light into something holy. Inside, the scent of beeswax and stone filled the air. Benoit Blanc paused at the threshold, removed his hat, and let the stillness settle over him like a blanket. No tourists. No congregation. Only the creak of wooden pews and the distant murmur of a kettle boiling in the vicarage next door. He didn't have to knock. Reverend Godfrey Hatch, a stooped man in his early 60s with the gentle air of a librarian, opened the door before. Blank could lift his hand. "Mr. Blank," he said, sounding unsurprised. "I was wondering when you'd come. You knew I would?" The vicar gave a small smile, tinged with sadness. "Iris told me she'd invited you. Said the village needed someone to untangle its knots." Blank nodded politely. "May I come in?" The vicarage was plain and warm. Old mismatched chairs, a teapot sweating on a tray, and books lining every wall, Psalms and Shakespeare side by side. Blank took a seat by the window, and Hatch poured 2 cups without asking how he took it. "I won't dance around this, Reverend," Blank said gently. "I understand Iris entrusted you with things, burdens, perhaps. And I also understand that the morning of her death, she left a letter for you." The vicar's fingers tightened slightly on his teacup. "She did. May I see it?" A pause. Then Hatch rose, disappeared into the next room, and returned with a pale blue envelope. Chapter 1. The fragrance of celebration. It was the sort of morning Thistledown Vale was known for. Mist curled along the hedgerows like sleeping cats, and chimney smoke rose into the pale lavender sky. The village stirred gently to life, its rhythm unhurried, its people settled into a comforting loop of routine. The paper at 8, tea by 9, and gossip all day long. On this particular Saturday, however, there was a rare sense of excitement in the air. The annual Rose and Lavender Festival was in full swing. Bunting fluttered from shop windows, and the green outside the church had been transformed into a patchwork of stalls, teacups, and trimmed hedges. The entire village, from children in flower crowns to pensioners in tartan scarves, gathered to celebrate the midsummer bloom with lemon drizzle cake, homemade perfume competitions, and local choir performances. At the heart of it all stood Mrs. Iris Willoughby, chairwoman of the Foam, parish council, and unofficial queen of Thistledown Vale. Tall, elegant in a mauve silk blouse, and always surrounded by the faintest trace of rose attar, she was the sort of woman who seemed to belong to another century, one in which letters were sealed with wax, and secrets were passed in folded notes. "Dare say this year's turnout is our best ever," she beamed, her voice clipped and cultured, as she welcomed guests with gloved hands. "And I do hope everyone samples Clarissa's elderflower cordial. It's quite divine." Clarissa Penhale, the local apothecary, had just won first prize for her latest handcrafted perfume, Summer's End, a complex blend of crushed violet leaf, bergamot, and something deeper, something people couldn't quite place. "It smells like memory," one woman murmured. "Grief," said another, more quietly. At precisely noon, as the church bell tolled 12 times, and the choir launched into a slightly off-key rendition of Greensleeves, a scream shattered the day. Like glass underfoot. It came from behind the rose garden, where the judges had just completed their rounds. People rushed forward, some shielding their children's eyes, others drawn by that dark, irresistible pull toward disaster. There, lying face down among the crushed petals, was Iris Willoughby, a single bee still buzzing lazily around her perfumed wrist. Her hat had fallen askew, and her lips were tinged with an unnatural blue. Nearby, her velvet judge's ribbon fluttered in the wind. A hush fell over the festival, the kind of hush that knows instinctively when joy has left the room. Within the hour, the local constable, Sergeant Lennox, had cordoned off the area. He was a square-jawed, no-nonsense man with a fondness for rules and an uncomfortable relationship with ambiguity. By tea time, he had declared it a tragic accident, perhaps a heart attack, brought on by heat and excitement. But there was one man in the crowd who did not look away. He stood apart, hands folded neatly behind his back, observing with eyes that missed nothing. Benoit Blanc, famed detective, visitor to the Vale for the first time, and guest of none other than Iris Willoughby herself. He had arrived 2 nights ago at her invitation, under the pretext of giving a talk to the Historical Society on the psychology of deception. But now, with her sudden death scented faintly in the air, and mystery coiled like smoke around the village green, he remained quiet, thoughtful, and still. He walked over slowly, not to the body, not yet, but to the perfume table. He lifted the winning bottle of Summer's End, unscrewed the cap, and took a long, deliberate breath. Then he smiled, just a little, and said nothing at all. Chapter 2. The scent lingers by the following morning. The bunting still clung limply to windowsills. Though the air in Thistledown Vale had changed entirely. No one mentioned the word murder. Not yet. But everyone felt it. The villagers went about their routines with an awkward stiffness, like performers who had forgotten their lines. At the bakery, chatter was muted. At the post office, glances were exchanged like currency. And at the apothecary, Clarissa Penhale had not opened her shop, had all. Iris Willoughby's body had been removed late the previous evening. Word had it she was being examined in Meadowbrook, the next town over, by a real pathologist, though no one seemed to agree whether it was for routine procedure or suspicion of foul play. The only person not gossiping, not speculating, not showing any obvious reaction, was Benoit Blanc. He could be seen that morning, a pale blue linen suit against the gray English sky, walking slowly up the gravel path toward Thistle Cottage, the Willoughby residence. A quaint home with Tudor beams and too many geraniums in the windows. The garden, unsurprisingly, was immaculate. A small woman answered the door. She had kind eyes, red-rimmed with grief, and wore a black cardigan buttoned too tightly. "Must be Mr. Blanc," she said quietly. "I'm Edith, Iris's housekeeper. I suppose you'd like to come in?" He removed his hat, nodded solemnly, and stepped inside. The sitting room was perfumed with old rosewood polish and lilac potpourri. Everything was exactly in place. The cushions fluffed, the magazines aligned, not a single thread out of place. Except for the absence of Iris Willoughby, it felt like she might return from her errands at any moment. "I understand," she invited. "You here?" Edith said, standing by the fireplace with her hands clasped. "Yes," Blanc replied. His voice was smooth, gentle, a violin compared to the clattering piano of most men. She mentioned in her letter that the village was at a delicate crossroads. She did not elaborate, but I sensed unease in her tone. Edith looked down. That sounds like her. Always worried about something, even when everything seemed perfect. Was it perfect, Miss Edith? She hesitated. "No," she said finally. "Not really." Blanc moved to the small writing desk in the corner. A pale blue envelope lay unopened beside a fountain pen. It was addressed to Reverend Godfrey Hatch, the village vicar, in Iris's distinctive hand. Blanc didn't touch it. "Not yet. Tell me," he said, "how was Mrs. Willoughby's health?" "Strong as ever. She had a weak heart years ago, but she managed it, never complained. She didn't drink, barely touched sweets, and she walked every morning." "And did she have enemies?" Edith blinked. "Enemies? Here?" Pardon. Perhaps that's too strong a word. Let's say resentment, rivalry, a wound that had been left to fester." She sat down slowly, as if the idea had never occurred to her before. Then, people admired her, feared her maybe. She had a way of knowing things, secrets sometimes, and she could be sharp, especially if she felt you were letting the village down. Blanc gave a slight nod. She was at the perfume table when she collapsed, yes? Edith nodded. She was judging the entries. She leaned over Clarissa's bottle, said something about it being very unusual, and then she didn't need to finish. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. Clarissa's perfume, Blanc said gently. Summer's End. Was she close to Mrs. Willoughby? No, not really. Clarissa only moved here 5 years ago. Keeps to herself mostly. Some say she has a temper. Blanc allowed the silence to stretch a moment. Then, without looking at her, "May I see her?" Dressing room? Upstairs, behind a narrow wooden door, lay Iris Willoughby's sanctuary, a space of soft light and floral wallpaper, with a mahogany vanity and dozens of small, elegant perfume bottles arranged like soldiers. He inspected them carefully. Not a single one was out of place, except one. Near the edge of the shelf sat a crystal vial, dusty, with no label. Blanc uncapped it, held it to his nose,